Well, good afternoon and welcome. It's really great you've joined us for Wisdom of the Elders. I think there will be a lot of wisdom here this afternoon.
A lot of elders.
I don't even want to add up our cumulative ages. We'll stop there. And we'll treat at the end because Harry's going to close off the session with a song. So we hope you'll stay till the end and enjoy a really beautiful song that Harry selected. And I'm Rich Warren, the moderator. And my job is just let these people talk, basically. As Leo Kottke once said, I feel like a sandwich at a feast because I am surrounded by people who've made a mark on folk music and folk culture that is unrivaled, really, in so many aspects. So I'm going to give brief introductions, or as brief as I can, because the curriculum vitae of these folks who are sharing this table with me is so impressive. I could spend half the time just telling you what they've done, because they've done so much. So I'm going to try to give a brief bio, and then we'll ask some questions and have a conversation started. And hopefully we'll have time, maybe 10 minutes toward the end, where you can ask questions and find out more about these varied careers. So we'll do this alphabetically. Joe Abels over here, to my right, your left, is the proprietor of the most successful and prestigious music club in Austin, which is saying a lot, because this is Austin after all. And he opened the Saxon Pub 35 years ago, and over the years has presented every major artist you could think of, a lot of people in the folk community. He's very proud of not just the artists, but of the vibe he created in the club, the welcoming atmosphere, the way the staff treats the patrons, the way the staff treats the artists, and it's cumulative in what a great success the pub has been. And as he says, it doesn't hurt to have major icons of the music world stop by and play. And so they presented Bonnie Raitt and Christopherson, and of course Kimmy Rhodes and Willie Nelson, and the list goes on. We could go on for a long time. And I think I'll be asking Joe how he got into opening a venue, because one of the greatest and easiest ways to lose money is to open a venue. And he somehow has surmounted that and actually made a successful career out of it, which is truly wonderful. On my left side, your right, or right of me, is Kimmy Rhodes. I think all of you know Kimmy. She's had an incredibly successful career as a musician, but even more so. Playwright, humorist, documentarian, ambassador, cookbook author. There's anything you haven't done in your life? It's truly amazing. I printed out this long description of what she's done, and I just can't believe it. She's a native Texan, born in Lubbock, and the Austin Chronicle calls her a prolific fixture in Texas music. She enchants crowds with tales and songs related to her songwriting and performance. She has collaborated with Willie Nelson, Emmylou Harris, Waylon Jennings, Tom Petty, and many more on her over 30 years on the road. And she intertwines her songs with positive messages of compassion and understanding. And she creates vignettes, and she's a theater act as well as a musician. And it's created a unique career, I would say. And we're going to ask her how that came about, how she wove so many strands together to create this multifaceted career. And on the far end of the table here is the man probably most credited with creating a folk music scene in Denver, which is no small town. He's like a one-man Denver folk scene. And he started out listening to music and folk music. He was born and raised in Philadelphia. He was born in 1935. And he grew up with
55, folks.
Oh, okay. Okay, you have to leave the panel then, 'cause you're not old enough. Anyway, but the amazing thing is that he got into folk music, and he started appearing or going to hoots at the Gilded Cage, and he met Dick Weissman, who was a noted folk musician, and they palled around, and they went to New York City, and he got to meet Izzy Young of the Folklore Center, who was an institution in Greenwich Village in those days. And then he drifted to Chicago, hung out at the Old Town School of Folk Music for a while, which is a unique institution in Chicago, went back and forth to the coast, picked up more music, more experience, And then his friends urged him, well, why don't you go back to Denver and open a folklore center? And he
Why don't you
did.
Get out of town.
Yeah. So he sold just about everything he owned. He took his life savings. He loaded up his old Dodge pickup truck and headed for Denver in 1961 and opened the Denver Folklore Center on March 12th of 1962 on 17th Avenue in Denver's Swallow Hill district. And through the years, things have changed. He's closed the club, reopened, and et cetera, but it all built on this folk scene in Denver. And I think most people who love folk music, who live in Denver, would credit him with keeping the scene alive there. And as a bonus, not only is a solo performer, but he's part of a trio called Grubstake, which is a very popular group in Colorado and environs. And so he was actually, on February 12th, 2012, was inducted into the Colorado Music Hall of Fame. On October 17th, 2016, the Denver City Council proclamation was passed recognizing Harry Tuft's extraordinary contribution to Denver's music scene and declaring that day, October 17th, Harry Tuft Day. So you can see that this panel, a wealth of experience, and we say wisdom of the elders. I don't care how old they are certainly wise. And so we're going to start, and I think I'll just start with Joe since he's over here. And how did you get in the idea of opening a club? That's a really complicated thing to do. Let's have an idea, what led you to that?
It was an accident. Quite honestly, I had a guy I grew up with, he's an accountant, he was kind of partnered up with him in his firm helping him do accounting work, and he specialized in bars, and one of them was Steamboat way back, and so I got to know Craig Hillis, who owned Steamboat, and then I ran across that facility that on Lamar was always a bar. For many years, it was always a successful bar, whether it was the boss's office or the living room. There's all kinds of names on it. And it went out of business, and the guy that owned it called me to help out on his final audit. Back then, the TABC was doing all the tax work for a bar, and it was horrible. It was scary what they could do. Particularly, you had missing liquor. So anyway, I helped him get through that, and then I asked him what he's going to do with this space. And so I brought Hillis over there one night, went in, and I said, man, I got an idea of this piece of what? And I said, man, I think we're too old for 6th Street. And I see this place, a little stage in a corner, and doing something for a little folk music thing where we can have a quiet drink over here. And he said, well, that sounds like the old Saxon Pub. And sure enough, if y'all don't know, that Saxon Pub was off of 35 and 38 and a half, around that area. I think the building's still there. And that was one of the oldest venues way back in the late 60s that Murphy and Jerry Jeff and I think Buffett might have dropped in there, but it was a songwriter place. It was a listening room. And it closed in the early 70s, so that I found out the name was still available. And so we decided to reopen the Saxon Pub, and that's how it all started. And it was all real cool, and I think Fromholtz might have been the first act we ever had there. It was running real smooth and quiet until Badfinger played there one time, and I got him for $1,000. I told Hillis this would be the greatest thing in the world, the loudest thing in the world. I can tell you that. So we kind of changed that. But we've been very fortunate over the years with approaching 40,000 set changes. Believe it or not.
Wow.
We have 3 every day.
You presented a wide variety of people, but you sound like you were sort of leaning toward Americana and folk. Where did that come from in your background? What led you to that?
Just something I grew up listening to. I like all kinds of music. Don't get me wrong, but I like good lyrics. I like presented in a way you can hear it and understand it. I like soft guitar playing. I even like banjos. I love fiddles, so I kind of like that. And so I thought it would have been a real needed place in Austin for something like that. And yes, we do different stuff, but we always fall back on singer-songwriter folk stuff, and have done it for quite some time.
Well, Kimmy, how did you get into music initially as a child? What led you to become an artist, a performing artist?
Well, I had a really interesting. The story's too long to tell, so I had to write a book. But my dad was a carny. He had grown up at a carnival, and so I did not have the typical father that most of my friends had. He could play percussion on the phone book with his elbow and the spoons, and he was always playing the dishes. And my dad was he was a wannabe musician, all his life. And so he had been adopted by a woman that was traveling with the carnival, and so he grew up at the carnival, and then he just was a showbiz kind of a guy in a weird sort of way. And Marcia Ball says, I'm still a carny. But she says, your dad's not a carny, you are. But he started me singing when I was 6 years old.
Wow.
And my job was to front the band. And honestly, I've gotten to a point in my life where I think writing the book was good for that, because I will now admit that when we moved to Lubbock, my dad took football bets. It was illegal. So he would stand me out in front of these car dealerships singing Old Rugged Cross in my pressed little cute cotton dress with my purse. And I would stand out there and draw a crowd singing for 10 cents, like he taught me to do. And he'd go in the back, and so I was a foil for gamblers is another answer. So it's a hard thing to answer. But then I did grow up in Lubbock, Texas, and there was a real music scene that started up around that time. It was some sort of a weird vortex there that Buddy Holly and tornadoes and stuff caused. I don't know. But anyway, I grew up there, and it was a real musical time. And you could, there was all kinds of good music across every genre. So I would feel really lucky to have been a teenager during the Beatles and all that stuff. And, one thing led to another, but because music had always been in my life at a very early age, from as long as I can remember, it was the natural way to go. I, on the other hand, when they'd say, what do you want to grow up to be, said I wanted to be a florist. Because I was already a singer, it was what's to aspire to. So I became a florist, which worked out really well because I could be a florist in the daytime and then go play in bands and stuff at night. So my day gig, I loved doing it, and it made me money, and then I'd go play in bands at night. I came to Austin in '79 to make records.
Yeah, well, that must have been the point where you actually didn't have to be a florist anymore during the day.
Well, I still had to be a florist during the day. I played with a guy named Jimmy Day, who was a legendary steel guitar player, who played with Willie and Ray Price and everybody. I was in his band. He was in my band. I played in a swing band. I had to work pretty hard because I was getting a divorce and I had 2 kids. So I'd work in the daytime as a florist, and I was in 3 or 4 bands at night. One of them was mine. And but I've had a really charmed life, I think, because one of the first people I met when I came to town was Joe Gracie, who had been on Coke FM. Anybody here remember Coke FM? So Old Blue Eyes on Coke FM, and he also was the first talent coordinator for Austin City Limits, and had, was emceed all the shows. And so I immediately fell in with the right people. Really, about the 5th person I met when I moved to Austin was Willie Nelson. And he invited me to make my first record at his studio. He saw in me immediately. He looked at me and said, how long have you been singing? And I said, since I was 6 years old. And he said, do you write? And I said, yes. And he said, why don't you come out here and make a record? 3 questions. And I went, okay. So, and then I went to Nashville, and the very first person I met in Nashville was Cowboy Jack Clement. So I really I just feel like it was meant to be, because it was just boom, boom, boom. It was like, go here, go here, go here. And everywhere life took me was the top of the game, really, at the time. And they mentored me and taught me, how to do Monday nights at the Saxon Pub. And I guess it's the quick answer.
So how did you start weaving other things into your performance? I mean, you seem to have some theatrical influences, and your book and cooking and all this kind of thing that you've made into your life is much richer than just being a performer.
Well, as time progressed, I realized I was a writer first, even though I'd been singing, and I love to sing, and I love to perform. But if I had to give up one or another, there was a producer, Fred Foster, asked me one time. He had produced a lot of people's first records, and Christopher Starverson, and he was going to do some tracks with me. And he said, "Well, I need to know, what are you first? Are you a singer or are you a writer?" And nobody had ever asked me that before. And I said, "Well, I'm a writer first, because that's something I have to do to understand the world around me." So my mother had always taken me on my I think it was I was in maybe the 6th grade or something. I can't remember when it was. Whenever the Beatles came out, on that birthday, I got 2 records. I got Meet the Beatles and My Fair Lady. My mother gave me My Fair Lady, and she would take me to plays, and I loved plays, and I was in theater when I was a little kid. And she took me to learn acting, and when I first came to Austin, I took acting lessons, and I done some films and stuff. So I loved acting, but not my first love. But one day, it's a weird thing for me, because it's like the Willie song where it says, "Be careful what you're dreaming, or your dreams will be dreaming you." My dreams have always been dreaming me. So I sat down to write a song one day called "Small Town Girl," based on I wish I hadn't traded places with you, because now you can see. But I was going to write this one song called "Small Town Girl" about my dad and growing up and everything. And I sat there, and for 3 weeks I couldn't stop. I could barely even sleep, and I just kept writing this story, and then I'd write a song, and I'd write a story, and I'd write a song, and I didn't know what it was. I just knew that was what I was doing. And then I met Joe Sears of Greater Tuna. So people started going, "Well, that's a play." And I realized that the whole time I was writing it, there was this clown character, this angel/clown character was Joe Sears of Greater Tuna. And I went to see the play. I had mentioned it to someone in New York. She brought me, she just won the Helen Hayes Award, starting at the top again, and wanted to do my play. She wanted to write the book. But I didn't like what she wanted to do with it, so I said, "Well, let me think about it." And I drove to Dallas. I went to see Greater Tuna. I went back to say hello to Joe Sears, and it turned out he had just been with her at the Helen Hayes Awards, and he said, "I want that part in your play, and I want to produce it." So, it just all kind of magically, all these things happen, and the next thing I know, Joe Sears moves in 2 doors down, and he's there for 10 years, and we wrote plays for 10 years, and I was the music director for The Trail of Tears, and next thing I know, I've got 100 people in the cast and 4 choirs, and it just balloons. So you tell me how I ended up in theater. Really, I wanted to write a play. I didn't even want to write a play. I just accidentally wrote a play, and then we wrote about 5 plays, and then I had written a novella cookbook, kind of accidentally the same way one time, that I won't talk too much and go into that story. But after Joe Gracie died, he had started this book called Radio Dreams, and I was the nagging wife who was such a good writer, and I'd be, "Gracie, please just go write today, just write." He wrote all these great things, and then of course, like a lot of men would do, he died and left me to finish the book. And I felt like it was just something I had to do, because I wanted people to remember him and everything he'd done. And I just strung together all the things that he had written and things that I wrote, and put our story together. It was the story of the outlaw DJ and the cosmic cowgirl. and everything really are just pieces that I strung together, because he had already died, and people started to pummel me with more things that he had written. So I did this book, and then I guess I didn't know how to spell author, and now R1. It's been a real just follow the yellow brick road kind of a thing for me, but at the heart of it is just, if I write, I understand what I'm supposed to be doing.
So you're not dependent on FTD anymore for your living, so.
You know, no. I mean, no. I still have flowers all the time.
So, Harry, your bio talks about you playing a series of instruments, clarinet, ukulele, baritone uke when you were a kid. How did that come about? I mean, this is before the folk boom, before it was really popular. How did you end up playing those?
Well, I think that it was typical in the Jewish homes in that time that the kids would learn music. And for me, it started out with piano when I was 7, and then graduated to the clarinet at 10. Went to camp where this counselor had this little instrument that I'd never seen before called the ukulele, and that was fascinating to me. So my folks bought me a uke. And as I went along, I found out about the baritone uke, was just a bigger uke, and then I had a chance to travel in Europe with 2 friends, and so I decided I was going to learn the guitar because the baritone uke is basically the 4 treble strings, the highest strings of a guitar. So I was going to buy a guitar and add those other 2. And so I went to the music store on 52nd Street and bought the only guitar on the wall for $18. It was a Chimes guitar, and sat in the back of this rented car traveling around Europe learning these other 2 strings. And by the time I got back to Philadelphia and went back to college, I was able to play the guitar a bit, and a fellow named Bob Coltman had started a folk song club that I heard about, and I was excited about that. And so he had already invited Pete Seeger to come, who came in the afternoon and talked to us as a group and then did a concert in the evening. Well, I knew about Pete Seeger because my folks had bought an album of Pete Seeger. I had a bit of folk music growing up. My father was an ardent classical music and opera lover, and we had lots of 78. And I didn't realize really till after he was gone that he was a real audiophile. He bought he bought the latest stuff. He had a wire recorder. For 78s, he had a big console piece of furniture made by Capehart, and you put your 78 albums on a rack, and they would slide down and get played, and then turn them over. This yoke would come and pick them up and drop them down, and it was pretty magical. And it only broke about 1 every 10 or 15. But it was a way that we listened to his music every night at dinner. And then I lived on the 3rd floor, which was nice because nobody else lived on the 3rd floor. And I had a radio, and then I went on to listen to music up until 1 or 2 in the morning, and sing along because what I always wanted to do was sing. It just was fun to do.
Let's go back to you, Joe. If somebody came up to you today and said, "I'd like to open a music club," what kind of advice would you give them?
Get $1 million, and good luck the first 6 months. But I don't know. It's really hard now because everything's so high. It's taxes, rents, and if you're going to rent, buying a building, all that's so ridiculous right now, and it's getting worse. So it would be very difficult to do. I think I really do. Depends on the market. Always about where you're going to put it in. I'm looking at Rockport one day to put one in there. It's got some Rockport, but it's too little. So it's got to be, I don't know, the population's got to be right. It's just I couldn't tell you to do it. I might be honest with them and tell them, why don't you loan me $1 million, you can be my partner, maybe something like that, which happens a lot in our business, but I've never done it. But anyway, I wouldn't recommend it. I wouldn't.
Well, there's some good, honest advice. So if you're thinking of opening a club, maybe you should look somewhere else for a living.
Out of Austin, you know. Yeah.
Well, just about anywhere, I would imagine,
Yeah.
is facing the same thing now because of rents and inflation and everything. I'd like to explore a little more about your cooking and your recipes and things. How did that become a part of your life?
You know, you just ask these questions and I have to answer them. Well, Joe Gracie loved food, but he had lost his tongue. But about 6 months before I met him in '79, he had cancer and lost his tongue. But he could still taste. And he loved food, and he was a producer, and so, you know, everything, all the dots connect. So what happened, let me see if I can put this in a nutshell. What happened was a guy named Calvin Russell, who couldn't draw 10 people to the Saxon pub on any night.
I loved it.
He was great. Well, Gracie accidentally produced a hit record on him on a French label, and Calvin overnight is playing all of the largest venues in Paris, France. And so that led to a whole slew of French artists on labels being sent to Austin to make records at Willie's with Joe Gracie. So suddenly, and it was kind of a wish of ours to, you know, go to France, and, you know, we were kind of beginning to want to be Francophiles anyway, and then suddenly here come all these French people. So, you know, they eat every day. So once a day, but for about 4 hours. So they would go to the studio. There was this one in particular, the French Elvis, his name was Dick Rivers. And he had started his career as a teenager. I mean, you can't make this shit up, right? So he had a huge career. He was the French Elvis. The Beatles opened for him. So we've got this big French singing star and his wife Babette come, and they come. It seems like they're forever there, and he brings with him a whole entourage of photographers and hangers on. He's like Willie, and he's never alone. You know, there's always 15 people. And so they started coming to make records, and so it would go like this. They'd go to the studio about 11 o'clock, work all day long. Babette would just slowly cook a magnificent meal all day long, every day. I was a writer, and I was traveling a lot to New York and Nashville and stuff in those days, you know, in L.A., and working with a publishing company. But when I was there, I'd follow Babette around and watch her cook, and then they would leave the studio, and at about 8 o'clock at night, we would start drinking wine and, you know, have an aperitif, and then at about 3 o'clock in the morning, we'd all go to bed after having eaten a very long meal that Babette cooked. And so I learned a lot about French cooking. You know, my dad taught me a lot about American cooking when I was a kid, but so, and then we kind of became this movable feast where we'd go over to France, and I'd do all the background vocals in French, and we'd eat, and then we'd all come back over here, and then we'd record some more, and then we'd all go back over there. All like 10 or 15 of us were like this, constantly moving between Texas and France, and there was just a lot of eating going on, you know. So I ended up with a lot of funny stories too, because I was on a Swiss label where we stay every year. We'd go there and we'd stay with the guy who had the Guinness Book of World Records for peeling asparagus faster than anyone in the world. So I got a lot of recipes from him, and, you know, there were all these chefs. I mean, there's never a sane answer when you ask me a question, but I'm writing a book right now called Eat or Die. It's a food memoir, and it's more memoir than it is food, because there's just all these hilarious stories starting from when I was 16, and they threw a rattlesnake skin down and said, cook that and let's see if it tastes like chicken, you know, to all these French and Swiss, and, you know, they've just always been, I mean, because you eat every day, no matter where you are on the road or who you are with. There are food stories, and a lot of them end up being pretty funny. So, and then the other one, was I have a cookbook out called The Amazing Afterlife of Zimmerman Fees that I did not mean or want to write. I didn't have time to write a book. But it started coming to me one morning, just clear as a bell, because I had seen someone, I was in Nashville on a writing trip there, and I saw a couple of people get hit in a parking lot. And I was traumatized, you know. Everybody survived and everything was okay, and I was trying to not think about that, but I went home and I started processing it, and it turned into a comedy about a songwriter who gets hit in a parking lot and dies and goes into his afterlife. And on page 9, it turned into a cookbook. So that's how I ended up writing my first cookbook. It's a novella cookbook, and I was having a really great life at that time. We did a record in my living room that the Letterman show called and asked if I'd be on the Letterman show with the record I made in my living room. And then Barnes and Noble called about the cookbook that I was doing at the same time and ordered 2,000 of them and asked what department to put it in. So, you know, it's just, I just get up every day and see what happens. You know, it's really, I don't know if there's a lot of wisdom in that. I guess the only wisdom in that is just to go with it. You know, and if it's something you want to do it. But that's how I got into food writing. And then I will say, I'd like to say at the very end of it, when my husband's cancer came back and he went to MD Anderson, he had become a food writer for SWRFA magazine, which is a big magazine in New York. And so he walks into MD Anderson and they say, "What do you do?" And he says, "Well, I'm a music producer and I'm a food writer." And they're like, "How can you be a food writer? You don't even have a tongue." So they loved having him. They loved having him in the research department, and it gave his life purpose at the end to be part of the University of Texas MD Anderson research on how could this guy taste when he didn't have a tongue. And it was a kind of a groundbreaking thing, because they figured out that in your olfactory, you're really sorry you even asked me this question now. Your olfactory and memory are in the same place. And so they decided that you have more taste memory in the same place that your smell is than they realized, because he did not have enough taste buds to be tasting everything. I mean, he was a real connoisseur of wine and everything. He just couldn't taste complex sweet. It was difficult for him. So anyway, there's that answer.
Well, you actually said something.
Next question.
In that process, that there's something you want to do, you should go for it. Didn't you say something? So that's basically, and I think that's a great deal of wisdom.
Yeah.
That if there's something in your life that really interests you, then try it out, go for it. I mean, that's my wisdom, is to, you know, if you think you can do something, do it. And if you fail, you know, you still have tried it, and it's worth having tried it.
It's just a book. You know, I mean, I think that the reason all these things kind of magically happened to me, for one thing, I was mentored by Cowboy Jack Clements, who sang the song, "We must believe in magic, we must believe in the guiding hand. For if you believe in magic, you have the universe at your command." So I'm sitting there green, just fresh from the farm, watching Johnny Cash and people run around and hearing all this believe in it. And that's kind of boiled down to intent for me. I think if you intend to have a club or a folk club or play a baritone ukulele or whatever, I think if you know what you want and you set your intent, then it's, you know, partially it's just good luck and magic, but also in little ways every day you're just moving towards the thing that you intend to have happen in ways that you might not realize, in phone calls you return, or notes you make, or songs you wrote, or, you know, and then life just kind of throws things in your path that if you're paying attention, things happen. I'm from the Willie Nelson school of everything you need is somewhere around you all the time, you know. I mean, how do you become a superstar? because you know what's going on around you.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So, Harry, you spent some time with Izzy at the Folklore Center in New York. Now, I believe that was his business. It was a profit-making institution.
Theoretically.
Yeah, well, theoretically. Yeah. Well, all of folk music is theoretically a profit. Yeah. And then you visited the Old Town School, which was a nonprofit, and somehow it has survived. And so, when you opened your center in Denver, was it a profit-making or nonprofit or?
Well, I'll say two things. For one, I can safely say that I had absolutely no idea what I was doing in life all along. Just, I was.
Makes my point.
I was just there. The only two things that I can really point to. One is that I just loved to sing. And the other, through a course in college, I got fully enamored of city planning because I loved buildings. I would climb on anything that was going up in the neighborhood, and I just loved that stuff. I remember walking on the Schuylkill Expressway as it was being built, just because it was so, to me, so exciting to have things being built. And city planning, there were several wonderful articles in magazines that I was supposed to be reviewing that just led me to city planning. Meanwhile, my father, who was a doctor, who severely wanted me to be a doctor, and I was severely failing at that. But I had started out in summer school to try to get enough credits to get into medical school the next year, and it was just not working. And city planning was all in my mind, so I went across town from Temple University to Penn, where there was, I hoped, a course in city planning, of which there was none. But it said if you want to be a city planner, you either go through architecture or sociology, and sociology did not interest me at all. So I enrolled in the School of Architecture for another undergraduate degree, went home and told my father that I was not going to be a doctor, that I was headed to be a city planner. And without a pause, he said, well, you'll never amount to anything. Just like that, across the dinner table. Fast forward a number of years, and my father, who was on the faculty at Temple University, was in the elevator, and he told me this story. And an intern came in, got on the elevator with him, and looked at him and said, "Oh, you're Harry Tufts' father." So we found parodies somewhere along the way, but I got started on the Folklore Center. I learned about the Old Town School of Folk Music incidentally because I had befriended Dick Weissman, who was a wonderful guy, very smart, very musical, was a studio engineer in New York, although he was from Philadelphia and would come to these Sunday sessions at the Gilded Cage. And he had been invited out to the Old Town School and asked me if I wanted to come. He was going to drive this old Renault out there. And so I had a chance to see what was going on at the Old Town School. Years later, when I decided I wanted to start lessons, I started group lessons based on the model that I had learned at the Old Town School, which was a great benefit. But the way I got to start the Folklore Center, yes, I incidentally knew Izzy. I'd been at the Folklore Center, but didn't know a lot about it. But I had auditioned at a club called the Exodus in Denver. It was the club on the circuit for lots of traveling folk musicians. And I auditioned there for the owner, Hal Newstetter. And the word was that if he liked you and was going to hire you, he would criticize you. And if he was not going to hire you, he would be nice to you. And of course, he was nice to me. So I knew what was happening there. So I was working at a restaurant bar in Georgetown, up above Denver, in the early part of the mountains. And Hal was headed to Aspen, and the pass was closed. He remembered that about the Holy Cat where I was, and stopped in and spent the afternoon talking. And in the process, he said he thought somebody could make a part-time living with a folklore center like there was in New York City. And he was right. After 50 years of being in business, I've made a part-time living. but I was aided by a couple of things. There was a magazine called Sing Out that was sort of like acoustic guitar of today for the field, and I put in a small business card ad that said, "Sooner or later, someone you know will be in Denver." That was probably the only good idea for advertising that I ever did. And as a result, people who were driving from the east to the west, between Chicago and LA, there was nothing, and the Folklore Center was a place to stop. And so that kind of put the store on the map. And in January of '64, I get a call from Manny Greenhill. Well, I knew that name because I knew he managed a lot of acts out of the East Coast. And he said, "I want to bring Joan Baez to Denver. Would you like to promote her?" I said, "Well, Manny, I got two problems. For one, I don't have any money, and two, I've never promoted anything." He said, "If you need any upfront money, I'll supply that." And he said, "I'll walk you through the promotion, and I'll give you 10% of the gross." Sure enough, we sold out 2,500 seat Denver Auditorium, and that started me on a career, I guess, a side career, a part of the Folklore Center, of bringing acts in to a variety of places, particularly Red Rocks. And it really kept the store afloat because it was a place where I really did not have to invest very much anything except my time, and there was a good chance that there would be a profit reward. And I'll just mention one incident. Through Dick Weissman in New York, I got friendly with John Phillips, who was part of the Journeymen when they were just forming, and I kept a friendship with John. And when the Mamas and Papas broke with their first album, I had a chance to bring them to Denver. But they needed a $5,000 guarantee. Well, I had also made friends with a fellow named Dick Lamb, who at the time was a lawyer and head of the Young Dems in Denver. And he wanted, and we'd gotten friendly. So I went to him and I said, "Dick, I want to bring the Mamas and Papas. I know that we'll sell out because they're hot, but I need a $5,000 guarantee." And he said, "Okay." And he gave me that. And yes, we sold it out. And I gave him two bags full of money for the night deposit with $17,000 in it in 1966 money. And he took his half of the profit and started his run for the state legislature, which led him to the governorship. And later he admitted that he had no idea who the Mamas and Papas were. And he was really sweating, but a week before the concert, they were on the cover of Life magazine. He said he immediately relaxed. But anyway, promoting was a joy and a reward.
That's a great story. I'm going to ask each of you a strange question, because from my perspective, having spent my entire life in radio, how important was getting radio airplay and coverage to your club, the success of the club? Did it was a major factor or incidental or what?
At the time it was, when it was really working, you know. Yeah, it was very important, and we did a lot of it. We did, we used to do a live radio show on Friday nights with KGSR. It was a big popular thing. It also allowed us to get big talent in to play the radio show, because that was considered a promotion and that would void any radius clause they might have. So that was a big deal to us. But yeah, radio was huge. I'm sad that I don't do much of it anymore, because I don't even do the Austin Chronicle anymore. You know, it's just, everything's so expensive. So, but social media has been the most effective thing we do. We pinpoint, we target, and it's easy for someone to look and find out what's going on at our place. So I feel bad about it, and it wasn't your fault the radio died. I want you to know that right now. You know, I know you have a great history in radio, but I have a lot of good friends in radio, and I hate to see it. I really do, but that's the way the world is now, right?
No, I hear you. That's true. I just was curious along the way, you know, that it did in fact serve your purposes. Absolutely. When radio was still radio.
We had some great Jody Denberg and all these folks. We had some really great folks here in Austin over the years in radio. Really, I really miss them. Not working with them, but it doesn't make any economical sense at all.
Kimmy, were there radio DJs or radio shows that were favorites of yours while you were coming up?
Well, Larry Monroe here in Austin was a huge champion for everyone, and I was Larry Monroe's first interview. And Larry Monroe was my second interview. So now I'm really showing my age, but you know, the thing for me to answer the first question was
that was when you were 6 years old when you first.
Yeah, right. Right. I was almost about 6 years old, but in my mind. But radio, American radio, you know, everything in those days, you couldn't put your own record out. You had to have a record deal, and having a record deal pretty much had become doing whatever they wanted you to do. And if you were a pretty young girl, you know, that meant stand here, sing this, do that. And I mean, look at me. I'm going to always do what I want to do. And so I kind of had a little bit harder. I turned down, you're looking at someone who turned down Warner Brothers, you know, I mean, because I didn't want to do what they wanted me to do. I wanted to do what I wanted to do. So I figured because it was a super highway didn't mean it was the road I was on, you know. And I'm glad now, looking back, I'm still real happy for the choices I made. But radio was a totally different thing here than in America in terms of just being outside of Austin and getting played on the Larry Monroe show. And that was before Americana radio came along. And I guess that we were supposed to be, I guess the closest I ever got to those charts. Now as a songwriter, I've done well on the radio, but as a singer, you know, there was the adult contemporary charts. You remember those? Yeah. I got on the adult contemporary charts, you know, but then it was about money. It was like, okay, if you'll just give us a little more money, then we'll get you further up the chart. So it was always the kind of a scam, and when your dad was a carny, you can smell him from a mile away. So I did like many songwriters, contemporaries of mine. I went to Europe. And my career, I mean, I went from playing the Cactus Cafe to playing for 25,000 people. And I walked out of the elevator and people started rushing me, and I'm like looking behind me to see who they're rushing. And, you know, so it was always kind of weird, but radio in Europe paid. They play your song and you get $50, you know, in your mailbox. I mean, so it was different radio in Europe than it was here. I never could really break into radio. I did do Americana radio. I did well on there with my West Texas Heaven album years ago and stuff. But radio here for me was never very much of an accessible thing because, you know, partly because they weren't willing to do what I wanted to do, and partly because I wasn't willing to do what they wanted me to. And so, you know, it was a business, and that wasn't the business I was in.
So, Harry, how helpful was radio in keeping the Folklore Center afloat? How closely did you work with your local stations? Did you do a radio show for a while?
I am a radio junkie. I started doing radio in college, and there was a fellow in Denver named Walt Conley who traveled, who was a really good entertainer, and he had a 1-hour show on a classical station on a Saturday and once a month, and asked me if I would fill in for him, which I did. And then I wanted to do my own, so I got a third-class operator's license, which you had to have in those days, and did a late night, my version of the Midnight Special on a Saturday night. And then fast forward some years, and the radio station KFML, which was one of the very best freeform radio stations in the country, needed a part-time DJ, and in those days you needed a third-class license, and Jerry Mills knew that I had one, and so I started there as a part-time DJ. And then almost as soon as I started, there was this guy doing this old-time radio show on Sundays, and the DJ responsible couldn't care less. But I grew up on that stuff, so the next Monday I said, hey, I'll take over that spot. And for 10 years, John Dunning and I did a Sunday morning old-time radio show. John Dunning literally wrote the encyclopedia of old-time radio. And he had 50,000 shows in his library, and got permission from the station to go over the hour before we did an ID, and to include cigarette commercials from the original, as long as we just put disclaimers on either side. And it was, I am a junkie for radio. I just love radio. But I should also say that it was radio that gave me music, because my father's classical music was fine, I enjoyed that, but what I really loved was all of the music that I heard at night. There were 3 kinds of stations. There was a rock and roll station, a middle of the road station, and an R&B, 2 R&B stations. And I listened particularly to the R&B station. There was one, Jocko's Big Swing Train was one. He said, hickory dickory dock, this is the jock, and I'm back on the scene with the record machine saying, ooh, Papa do, how do you do? And I was just hooked. So, so I learned what we now call the standard Great American Songbook. I learned all of that. I learned rock and roll, and I just had a wonderful education from radio.
And did radio help you keep the Folklore Center going as well?
It did somewhat. The fact that I had a show was a help. There was a fellow in Denver named Chuck Morris who opened a club called Ebbets Field with Barry Fay, and he would bring the artist. It was those days they did weekends, Friday and Saturday, and he would bring the artist on a Friday afternoon to my concert hall, and we would do a live cast through KFML to promote his club, but it also promoted the Folklore Center as well. And I did some advertising. The first Baez concert at Red Rocks, I co-sponsored with KIMN, which was the big rock station, and I got ads on that station at the time.
A little known facet of Chicago, just in case anybody's interested, since we've talked about the Old Town School of Folk Music, is WFMT was this unique classical station in Chicago that put a folk show on in 1953, and the same show's been on ever since at the same time. But what happened is the first year of the show, it was started by a guy named, you may have heard of him, Mike Nichols, the film director, comedian. He started the folk show on WFMT.
Amazing.
And he invited all his folk friends in Chicago, people like Fleming Brown and Win Strachey and Frank Hamilton and all the people who were in the folk community, do live jam sessions on the air. And they coalesced during this radio broadcast. The live portion only lasted about a year before it became a record show. But they got together along with some other fellow travelers and said, we ought to start a school for folk music in town. And Win Strachey was the kind of the center of it all. And so they, in 1957, founded the Old Town School of Folk Music. And originally it was, just a very amateur group of people trying to do this thing in somebody's apartment, actually, before they bought their first building. But it was all because of radio that the Old Town School got its start. So I just wanted to add that little piece of knowledge. I think we have, would anybody in the audience like to ask some questions? Because we've got these great minds up here. Feel free to. Yes, sir.
Yeah.
What can you say about the role of college campuses then and now? Whether it's in radio or more generally. I mean, there were, in Philadelphia, they had, I forgot the call letters, but the famous 7 words and great local radio. But what happened more generally?
I can answer that. Well, having said what I said about major commercial radio, college campus radio is where we went with our music as singer-songwriters. If you were mainstream, whatever format, college radio saved us for many, many years. And now it's like Joe said, it's kind of going away. But I will say this now. What that is morphed into is many people have streaming radio now. Everything's streaming. I just released a new record last year, and there's nothing to hold on to. There's no CD, there's no vinyl. It's streaming. And so I've had to reinvent myself if I want to stay in the music business and keep making records. And so I did a waterfall release across streaming platforms. And I work with it's kind of the equivalent of a label. It's sort of like 30 Tigers, but for streaming.
Does it pay like a label?
I paid pretty damn good money, but it depends on which label. But so far I've done better than I was doing on my own, but because now I'm figuring it out. But there are a lot of guys like you that were in radio that have knowledge of music that it's kind of opened up that anybody who wants to can do radio streaming now, so there are lots of streaming shows and on magazines the same thing. So college radio now is kind of morphed into these streaming programs, and like Joe said, on social media, I sat in the middle of my bed for 4 hours every morning and thanked DJs for playing West Texas Heaven.
That's how you sold it.
And I got put in rotation, and that you had to work really hard. And I did. But now, you can go on your Facebook page and tag them and say thanks for the play and thanks for the continued play. And social media, it's all starting to kind of, my experience with radio and the music business in general is it just all kind of falls apart every 20 years. and then when it comes back together, there's a little bit of an organization to it, and you have to hurry up and figure that out. And you can find your way, but I don't know that college radios, I'm sure they're probably struggling pretty hard right now.
That's a good question. I think
It is a good question.
I think it's all internet based now, and there's real horror stories out there in the music business about what kind of money you make off all these streaming going on, and it's sad. It's sad. A great songwriter from Nashville, he's from Huffman, Texas, named Alan Shamlin, wrote a huge song called "The House That Built Me." I might have heard this song. Great song that Miranda Lambert cut. And he told me how many millions of streams it did, and he got a check for $123. But it's changed. The laws have changed. In the next 5 years, it's going to be a lot better. But I don't know if radio's out there at all right now. I hate to say that. But.
Yeah, I hate to admit that a couple of years ago I tuned into my college radio station where I got my start, and it was automated. What's the use of having a college station that's automated? You're not teaching anything. So it really, the times have changed, and I recently am a convert to streaming. There's this wall of CDs at home, probably 1,000 folk Americana CDs, and my partner has 500 classical CDs, and we realized we're not playing any of them anymore. We just, either on our phone or on our tablet, we have this little nifty streaming box, and we click 3 keys, and suddenly any record we ever wanted to hear is playing in the house. And, that just, it's mind-boggling.
Well, in artists, there are different platforms now, like there's TuneCore. I'm with some people that are like a label. It's called Good Cop, Bad Cop. It's actually the guy who started Spotify, and he called me 10 years ago and asked if I wanted to work with him. And I went, why would I want to work with you? I took the guy to task, and he said, oh, you will. And then he called me back. He called me back 10 years later, and he said, okay, are you ready now? And I said, yes, I acquiesce. And so, but there are like ways for people to get their music out on streaming. That said, you have to figure out how to make a living. And many people, I make a lot of money off my book these days, and I play house concerts and things instead of bookstores, and I've had to reinvent myself a lot, and everybody's had to.
I think that's why you see ticket prices for live events are so high now. That's the only place you're making real money, really is.
And to answer a bit of your question historically, that some years ago, it was the college activity centers that brought folk acts that really helped that, and I'm sure that they worked in tandem with the college radio of the time, and that colleges really helped build this world of folk.
Here in Austin, it was Cactus Cafe and KUT. They were very symbiotic. It's what we did, but gosh, that's been a while now.
Well, this panel will be streamed. Yes, sir.
So, Kimmy, I'm just fascinated with your story, and you kind of presented it in a lighthearted, random sort of way.
That's the only way there is.
Yeah, except there's a couple of things you said that I think, if we were looking for wisdom, this is where it is. Paying attention, figuring out how to adjust, because things change, they just do. And there's a lot of things I miss, and I wish they were still that way, but they're not. And so you seem like you've really just paid attention, figured out where your slots are and your lanes, and you get in them. And
I just stay in my patch, because the thing, it's just I am who I am, and if I want to get outside of my patch, I don't get to be who I am.
yeah.
That's a good book title.
Yeah, that's good.
Write that down.
I've already got it. I'll sue you.
Okay. Yeah, good. I'd rather you sue me than try to get me to write it with you. but I don't have time to write that with you, Joe. But I don't know. There's so much I could say about that. I don't even know where to start. But I mean, really, I think that looking back, in terms of wisdom, I was wiser than I was smarter than I looked a lot of times, because, they called me one day and said, do you want to be the lead singer for Highway 101? And the week before that, Highway 101 had just won Band of the Year. And I said to the person who will remain nameless, and he also started the conversation with, Willie is incensed that I'm asking you this, but I'm asking you anyway. And I said, well, let me go listen to the music. I don't want to say no to that until I listen to the music. And I actually hung up the phone, drove to Waterloo Records, bought a cassette, listened to it on the way back home. I live an hour from town. Came back and said, I just really don't like their music, because I just really, it wasn't that I didn't like their music or think it was well played or whatever. I said, but that's a great band. Do you think they'd want to go as Kimmy Rhodes in Highway 101? And I wasn't even being a smart ass. I was just asking a question. But they said, no, and that's when I said the phrase, well, it looks like a super highway, but that's just not the road I'm on. Because and I'm so glad that whatever that was, I would have gone up and over in my entire career. Anything anybody knew about me would have been the calling card for who I am. And thank God that is not the calling card, but whatever the calling card is for who I am, I get to come as me, you know, and I just think that that's been the best thing I did. And also, you know, we put out our own records because my husband and I were mentored by Cowboy Clement, who was mentored by Sam Phillips, who had the strongest independent at Sun Records when they quit making race records and started putting white guys singing those songs. You know, and so I kind of came in to, my introduction was independence. And I knew how to be an independent. And so we put out our own records when it wasn't cool to do that. People were like, oh, you're not on a label, well, we don't want you, you know, it's like, okay, you know, but I was still making whatever music I wanted to make, and that was where my heart was. And then after everything started falling apart and Nashville didn't embrace CDs, the new format, you know, and or digital or whatever music when MP3s came out, and, you know, when things would start to flounder, then all those artists got off the label and came to us and said, now how are you doing that? And that's when everybody started being independent and putting out their own records anyway, and we've been doing it for years. And that's not bragging, that's just the truth. That's just how stubborn we were, because it's who we were. And I've still put out, I mean, I've got a you know, a revenue share with the people that put out my, wherever it is out there in the ether, new record. And I think the money just shows up somehow in my bank account, you know, and I don't know. I just keep making music and playing Joe's Club because that's what makes me happy.
So I guess the wisdom of this session basically is to be true to yourself, and you know, you can follow your muse, and if you do it right, you can have a great career. And I think we're about to end up. We've got about 5 minutes to go. We might have time for one more question, because then Harry's going to sing a song to close us out. Okay, well, let's.
And Harry loves to sing.
Yes, he does. And he still sounds great, too, so.
Well, we'll see.
Now, we've already heard you this weekend.
Yeah.
It's been an absolute joy to be here. I was invited again by Rich Warren to be on a similar panel for the National, and I got to say that this weekend has been way, way more valuable to me than that time at the National. So I thank you for the invitation, for sure. This is a song that was written by Jane Voss, who, with her partner Hoyle Osborne, live in Albuquerque, New Mexico, put out albums. I actually heard it by Dave Van Ronk, and it's also was sung by Chuck Pyle. It's a lot longer song than I have made in my own way, but it's a song that I was invited to sing at Spencer Boren's memorial in New Orleans, and I chose this song. It's a song that I think of being sung by someone maybe who's passed on, or just by a song for other folks like us who travel. To all my friends in far-flung places, when again I'll see your faces, no one knows, no one can say, and none can name the happy day when we embrace to greet once more, to take up where we were before, the miles and times that come between, the different lives that intervene like shadows in a dream. Now I'm with you. And to all of you who took me in, who shared the thick and stretched the thin, who gave me comfort on the run, who saved my life, who made it fun. Wherever you may be tonight, I hope this finds your burden light, your purpose high, your spirit strong. I hope that you have got along. My song was lost and gone, if not for you. To all my friends in far-flung places, may I stay in your good graces, hold me in your memory. And when you do not hear from me, don't think that out of sight is out of mind. For wherever you may be tonight, I hope this finds your burden light, your purpose high, your spirit strong. I hope that you have got along. My song was lost and gone, if not for you. Thank you. Thank you.
You actually still have a few minutes if you know, somebody
wanna
wants to
do a
share
song?
some more
We gotta
wisdom,
go.
or more questions, or just, but I'll just say thank you very much to Joe and of course Rich for moderating to me, and
It's
Harry, and thank you Rich for bringing Harry, and thank all of you too for showing up this afternoon. And this is being recorded, and I have gone back and watched some of them, and there's always something really funny. That's my favorite part. I just walked in a few minutes ago and already, I mean, everybody was laughing. And so
We have one more song.
we do. Oh,
I send this out to
okay,
Sunny.
but thank y'all very much for
Thank
doing
you,
this.
Dallas, for putting this. So, does anybody know who Sonny West is? You know who Sonny West is, right? You know who Sonny. Sonny West wrote "All of My Love, All of My Kissing," and he wrote. Nobody ever knows who Sonny West is, but he also wrote "Rave On, It's a Crazy Feeling." So I'm getting ready to have to get up ungodly early in the morning and get on a plane and go to Lubbock, because the Buddy Holly Educational Foundation, they make us ambassadors, and my superpower, I don't know how I get to be in that group, but I'm from Lubbock, or I grew up in Lubbock. So Sonny West wrote those songs for Buddy, and I got to write a song with him at the Buddy Holly Educational Foundation. Well, they put me in charge, so as the person who was in charge, I put myself writing with Sonny that day. I figured he had one song in him, and he had one song in him. So my son Gabriel Rhodes and I wrote this song with Sonny, and to make a long story short, after I said, "Well, Sonny, what happened after Buddy left?" And he said, "Well, he went to work for a company, jukebox company called Automatic Music Inc., so that he could keep music in his life." Now, looking at this demographic, you still know what a jukebox is. so we wrote this song about Sonny's time working with. The minute he said Automatic Music Inc., Automatic Music Inc. was a company that owned the jukeboxes and consigned them, and Sonny would go replace the 45s and repair the jukeboxes. And so this is a song about what happens when Buddy Holly leaves and goes to New York, and you don't want to work in a cotton gin, so you go to work for Automatic Music Inc. And really, honestly, I just asked Sonny questions. Once he made me understand that I was going to have to ask him one at a time, I asked Sonny questions and made what he said rhymed, and we got this song. This is for you, Sonny. I was once sitting. Oh, can I take this off?
Of course.
Because it's too high. Because of that being on there. Now, if I put it on there, it's just really entertaining. Right? Take that off. I was once sitting on top of a world that was spinning like a hit 45. The needle lifted up to my surprise. I got flipped to the B-side of life. Now I'm contemplating anything worth saving about the world changing under my watch. Automatic Music
sailing it out and wondering why it sinks. There was a little bit more to songs before they started running them through the machines. Rave on, automatic music. Sonny said his favorite jukebox was the Seabird. He said it was the Cadillac. I was once grooving to a sound that was moving through a Seabird Cadillac. Now I'm reminiscing about a world gone missing. It ain't ever coming back. And I'm contemplating anything worth saving about the world changing under my watch. Automatic music incorporated. Oh, I feel like an old jukebox. Rave on. Automatic music. It's like building a boat and sailing it out and wondering why it sinks. There was a little bit more to songs before they started running them through the machines. Rave on, automatic music. Rave on, automatic music.
Well, thank you all for so much for coming and sharing with us. And we'll see you here next year. We'll find some more elders. So.